dude, like Skinhead, Dapper. That's what I think when I think the Slackers. I think dancing. I think adults. I think maybe having a beer. I think even as far I think reggae. I think Africa. I think
organs. I was gonna say like organs being used in
I think
more keys being used in the music.
Mid to low tempo.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like pop punk. That's kind of like a pop punk thing that you're doing right there.
And when I think third wave ska, I think zany colors, silly music videos, dumb band names, stupider band album titles, like just ridiculous. Like, and I love Skank and Pickle, but like that's what I think. Skank and Pickle. Are you serious? Like it's just so ridiculous sounding. The Aquabats, that third wave ska, bro, silly, zany. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No. What's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome back to the Punk Rock Review Podcast. Rob and I have a pretty exciting episode for you guys this week. This is I guess, like a sister podcast to last week. We're going to talk about the same people, essentially. Last week, we talked about Operation Ivy, their impact on music, and the Suicide Machine's Destruction by Definition album, because I feel like it kind of goes along with that album very well with the Operation Ivy album. And so if you want to hear us talk about that, there's a link in the description to that video. This week, we're going to celebrate a couple of things. One, it's not necessarily a big date thing, but we're going to talk about Battle Hymns, which is the second album from the Suicide Machines. And then at the second half of the podcast, the bigger, more in-depth half is going to be celebrating 35 years of Rancid Let's Go. It just hit its 35, or I don't even think it happened yet. I think it's about to hit its 35-year anniversary.
Just 30.
No, 30. I'm tripping, dude. It's 1994.
Yeah, he still has his ACLs. It's just getting tired.
Dude, my brain is fried. 30 years. 35 was Operation Ivy. People roast me for that because I do that a lot. I mess up years. But it is what it is, man. You know what I meant. 1994, 2024. That is 30 years. Thank you, Rob. So, yeah, before we get started, let's chit-chat, man. How you doing, Rob? How's your summer going, bud?
Pretty good. Going kind of quick, but fairly productive. This was a fun pack of episodes for us to research for, because we kind of stayed in the same zone and kind of went forward. And like this is one of those weeks where it's like I feel like I had to get myself ready, because it's like big episode week ahead of us. It's one of our weightier topics we're gonna go into.
Right. What do we have coming up next week? Do we have anything?
I think I don't think we were so proud of this little schedule we made that we didn't plan.
I know. Oh well, it's all right. We'll figure it out. So, Steve played, I believe it was either drums or bass. I can't remember, in the band Mest. And he was in my stream the other night, and like we're talking and stuff, right? And he's like, "Yeah, I was in Mest," and I was like, "Do you mean like into the band? Like that was like a band you were into?" And he's like, "No, like in the band." And I was like, "What?" And then he tells us who his brother is. It's like the singer of the band, and it's like their last name is
Lovato. Was that
Lovato?
Yeah.
And
Tony Lovato is the lead singer. Yeah,
correct. Tony was the one. He said he was going to try to get Tony on the show. I know, right? Like I thought of you immediately, bro.
Yeah, did you say, "Hey, I happen to know the one Mest supporter that flies the flag"? Like
bro,
no other.
It was just so strange. And then when I realized that his screen name had something to do with the Chicago Bears, I was like, "Oh no, this dude's definitely from Chicago."
Yeah.
So if I can get him on the show, I just think it'd be kind of cool, man. Like my feelings on the music is almost irrelevant when you're talking to somebody that's just been around for so long.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
It's just a fun conversation, you know,
because that band is really in its current form. They're still together, kind of as the original band, but only like in studio or select shows. And then Tony pretty much tours with like a whole other band under the name Mest.
Interesting.
Those same songs.
That's kind of cool. It's one of those things. Do it.
Yeah, and they were. I think they're either cousins or brothers. The drummer and the singer. And I've always just like the dynamics of kind of what happened in that Fallout. I'm not saying you're going to get it off of your stream there, but it's a pretty interesting like story to sort of follow of like what happened to this band that was together, and then all this turmoil that happened, and then now they're kind of this legacy act that's good, pretty strong. All things considered, that they're able to kind of keep ticking right now when they've been dead a few times.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I thought it was so. I immediately thought of you. I was like, that's crazy. So we were doing that video on Operation Ivy, and somebody in the comments, Lewis B85. Shout out Lewis B85. He left a comment that said, it's in between Operation Ivy and a band from Bath, UK called Culture Shock, which was Dick Lucas's After Subhumans ska punk band. They had an album called Onwards and Upwards that this guy really likes. It came out the same year as Operation Ivy's album. That's big news. I had heard about that album, and I've heard it a couple of times, but it had been years and years. I had no idea it came out that year, though. That's new to me. So I listened to it today. I don't think that it's as good as Operation Ivy's by a pretty fair bit, but I do think it's important to notate when it came out, and it came out in 1989. I also don't think it's a ska punk record. I listened to it all the way through. It's a ska record with a tiny little bit of punk dropped in it, whereas Op Ivy's like the polar opposite of that. It's like a punk rock record with some ska stuff thrown in, and they did the black and white stuff. They did the unity stuff, so they flew the ska flag and honestly like the skinhead flag. And so they're known as like a ska. They're not really a ska band. Op Ivy is not really a ska band.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying there really applies to a lot of the Op Ivy or Rancid as a whole. They're very known for their ska, and it makes them very unique, both of those bands. So it points out, being a punk band is not necessarily a unique thing, in contrast to being a ska band or a ska punk band. So I think we tend to emphasize those things because they're so unique within that universe. But ultimately, it does fall into that zone. Whereas the thing you're talking about is mostly ska. It's kind of on the opposite end of that.
Right. Well, it was interesting because I just thought, like, I like to shout out people that bring me interesting comments. I read all the comments, so I think it's cool when somebody brings something to the table that I either never heard of, forgotten about, or didn't know all of it. And this dude basically hit those two. I had forgotten about it, and I didn't know that it came out that early. I thought it was like a 90s album. Because I heard it in the 90s. So I haven't heard it in forever, dude. It's been, I might have even heard it like in the 2000s even, dude. It was a long time ago, but it wasn't like early when I discovered Rancid and stuff. I had already known about those guys. So I just assumed this album was much later than that.
Yeah, and it's important to point out then that too, because a lot of what we talk about, we always talk about the start of ska punk really much being Operation Ivy, but that's a little more accurate for our purposes because we talk about like ska pop punk, and that's where that sort of is more originated with the Gilman scene, with the younger scene, with all of that stuff. It's not like ska and punk were not merged anywhere else outside of the Gilman Street. But I still think you can give ultimately Operation Ivy a lot of credit for popularizing it in the way that they did and the impact. But I think it is important to point out, like, when there's other parts of the underground that it's not like Operation Ivy came up with that out of whole cloth either. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, we're just gonna do this, you know.
But, and I'm gonna go into a little more detail on this later because I have something to talk about with Tim Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
But Operation Ivy blended the sounds. Most bands didn't do that. And that's exactly what I was talking about with this band he's talking about. They're not the same as Operation Ivy. They are a ska band. Operation Ivy wasn't. They blended the two sounds. They had stuff like, when you do Operation Ivy, you get bands like Suicide Machines, Less Than Jake. Those bands wouldn't be the same without Operation Ivy specifically. Because while bands like The Clash or Bad Brains did stuff with ska and reggae, they had ska and reggae songs in their catalog. They didn't have songs that were like ska punk songs. That just not to my recollection.
Yeah, not in the same way. And again, that's why that's where the specifically of the importance of Operation Ivy, where we put him as sort of the founder of what we're talking about, and that's a good point of creating kind of that as an original sound. And I think that's always a distinction, because you can even go on, like, you'll go to a tour sometimes with a lot of ska punk bands, and there'll be actual ska bands on there that are sort of intermixed. So it's interesting to make that distinction, especially like within the Hellcat range. Like, a lot of those bands are just straight up ska bands that are under the Hellcat label. We think of them very punkish because of they're on Hellcat, but that they're not necessarily that either, of the creating of the new sound.
Well, it's funny because every time you bring that up, I think you and I see that different, because I don't think of them as punk bands. I don't think as a Hellcat as like this punk label. I think of it as a punk rock label, but like the bands that are on it don't have a particular sound to me, because you got everything from Dropkick Murphys to Leftover Crack, Rancid, and F- and Distillers, and they did Silencers on there. I think there's even some like actual like reggae stuff on that label, some actual rockabilly. So that label has got a very broad palette as far as what it'll put out, but I do understand what you're saying. I don't know that I've ever thought about it that way until you started talking about it. But another video idea that I had that I'm probably going to go forward with is going to be a short video, because I don't know that I have the knowledge to talk for a long time about it. Is that I want to bring up the fact that is third wave. This pertains to these bands we're talking about tonight, so I can bring it up. Is third wave ska? Is it more of a, I don't know how to say it. Okay, yeah. Is third wave ska a sound, or is it a time? Because when you say third wave ska, people bring up bands like Hepcat, or the Slackers. Dude, have you heard those bands? They're not what I think of as third wave ska bands, but they were around during the third wave of ska. I think it's a really interesting topic, and it's a discussion that doesn't have to be had or anything.
There's not really a right answer, but no, I was thinking along similar lines, because that's a really good segue, I think, into the Suicide Machine stuff, because I was thinking about the 2000 album that you forced me to listen to, and because I think because the umbrella is so big on ska punk, and but like it's just so big. It's such a poorly defined genre, I think, in a lot of ways. You guys,
really?
I think so.
I think it's really easy to define everything.
No, but
we've done this a lot, though, where you say there's a difficult describing something, and I'm like, no, there's not. It's easy.
Because I have like 1,000 bands that are ska punk bands, and you have like 5. That's why, because we think in different terms of these.
Like
I'm just saying like everyone, what is considered ska punk, I think, is huge, from all the way from like Real Big Fish to Operation Ivy to all of this stuff that is just such a huge spectrum, to some people putting No Doubt in there, to doing all of this stuff. I think it's really hard to create like definitions on other than third wave. That's why I think third wave is convenient, though, because it's the ska-ish music that was around at that time. That's how I think of third wave ska.
Smash Mouth, No Doubt, Sublime, none of those bands are third wave ska bands. They are bands that have some ska in their music, but No Doubt wasn't a ska band.
But they are the results of riding the wave of third wave ska. Like, they are, when you think
that's fine.
Like that doesn't mean that ska, they are automatic. Like, those are the top bands, not Smash Mouth or any of those, but like No Doubt, definitely. We think of how did ska get so big in the late 90s? The first thing you're gonna think of, No Doubt, Real Big Fish, Mighty Boss Stones, obviously Rancid, and some of that other stuff.
So like I have never ever. Now, I'm not saying that other people don't. Okay, I'm just saying like whenever anybody asks me about ska, I have never thought of No Doubt. Nobody that I know and talk to on a regular basis has thought of No Doubt. It was Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Real Big Fish, Less Than Jake, and obviously Rancid. So Time Bomb, but it was never No Doubt. No Doubt had some ska in one of their early albums, and they were more like a pop rock with some ska in it.
They had like 45 people in a trumpet player initially, so that's not true at all.
Sure, but I mean, a lot of bands that aren't ska bands have trumpet players. That doesn't mean anything.
I know, but to say they're not, like, okay, maybe they're not ska, but ska adjacent and extremely responsible for the rise of third wave ska, I think that's just not true to say that No Doubt is not part of that party. Like, why was No Doubt popular? It's because that form of music grew up, right? Like,
that's no. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that whenever you ask me and my friends, what's responsible for that? I think the vast majority of people would say that No Doubt is responsible for that to some degree. My point is, I disagree with that. Like
So
they
then
can say that all they want.
What do you consider third wave ska would be like my question though, because I think of
ska bands first and foremost.
When I think of it as like the negative connotation people have with it, it is because of those huge bands that are also lumped in with it. Like that's a big part of
another thing we don't agree on.
Yeah,
I don't see any negative connotation with it. I've never heard anything that was like a negative. That's a good example of this. Like you and I are different ages by just enough, just barely enough to where we've had different experiences because I was like much older in the 90s than you were because of just this like little 5-year difference, right? Well, 5-year difference when you're in your adolescence years, like that's a big difference. So I never had a negative connotation with third wave ska. I was just ska. People fucking hated it. Like
that's a good point because I would have got it after the fact. We're like nobody likes ska when other than Rancid or Operation Ivy. Ska was something that I don't know if it's ever been redeemed. Like to be honest with you, not really. But like in the mainstream, because even like pop punk has had its moment in the last couple of years. New metal is kind of having a moment of third wave ska. People have just never bothered to consider even like reviving it. It's weird.
Okay, I will argue that. I don't think that's the case because I want to shout out to Mike and Bad Time Records. Like literally, this dude has like single-handedly revived ska and then kept it in a place that is not commercial, but is still pumping out really great music. I don't know how to explain it other than to say it like that. He's gotten it like to the cusp of where it was in the 90s and then put like a bottle top on it. And he's got this record label that it's amazing. And it's like where Catbite comes from. Mustard Plug just did their last album on Bad Time. I mean, this label is a ska punk, or they'll tell you we're a ska punk label,
and it's like so sustainable, so it can keep going. Yeah,
and it's all he does now is that label. It's his whole job now. And there's a lot of bands on there. I'm forgetting a bunch. I'm not trying to be shitty to anybody out there that's watching this, but I love Catbite. I found out about that label through Catbite, and so I think it's come back. It's just never going to reach the same heights because it doesn't have the same accessibility that a band like Blink-182 has. Like Real Big Fish was kind of a lightning struck, and it was like kadoosh, and then we get this ridiculous band because they were like out of all the bands that existed back then, they were the one that nobody took seriously. That's why No Doubt isn't considered like a ska band because they were much more than that. They did a lot of things, and Gwen Stefani is much more than that. And Sublime just wasn't really a ska band. They were like a surfer ska punk. They were just California.
Well, I think they're more appropriately like reggae punk even than
So
than
like
ska punk. Yeah.
So like I do think a lot of people would refer to that first No Doubt album as something that like I don't understand why that album wasn't very big. Tragic Kingdom was their big album, and that album didn't have ska punk on it. So like I don't understand. Like the connection,
but it's really the same reason why I couldn't understand why you asked me the question about My Chemical Romance being pop punk. It's actually the same concept, and probably from the same time of the standpoint and the perspective of I was kind of in my prime when that came out, and I was like, wait a minute, no, it wasn't talked about like that. And when you do,
isn't that crazy how just a few years will change
from how the stories are passed? Yeah, from how the stories are passed down, and hopefully like that's what, like think of how irrelevant our conversation probably will sound in 5 years. Like this, you know what I mean? Like when we have new information, or just like, no, that wasn't the case. What are you talking about? So it always.
There'll be a whole new thought process on it by then.
That's why we have to make podcasts forever, so we can just keep debating these things.
I'm super okay with that. So, like, before we get into this talk about this album, I do want to say that I think the conclusion that I came to is that third wave ska is a sound, not a time, because bands like the Slackers and Hepcat simply are not third wave ska bands. They are ska bands. They're of a older sound. They put out records back then, but they didn't sound like they were from that era. They were more almost like, because people would associate it with more like reggae. It wasn't reggae, it was ska. Ska came around the same time or a little bit before reggae did. But that is a sound, not a time. Now, the sound was born in a time. So people naturally think, if you were around in like the late 90s, you were third wave. No. That's when that sound was popularized. So that's why people associate it with that. But it's a sound, not an era to me.
That's a good point with those bands too, because I know a lot of people who would have found ska with like third wave ska and know a lot of those bands. So those bands benefited, I think, from third wave ska. But
they did. They definitely did.
I would like when you say those bands, like I would not think of them at all in that. Like I think of them as like directly opposed to that almost. You know,
Right. Well, like you think of those guys and you think, okay, I think of like, let's just use the Slackers as an example. Suits, but like nice suits. Mods, like dude, like skinhead, dapper. That's what I think when I think the Slackers. I think dancing. I think adults. I think maybe having a beer. I think even as far I think reggae. I think Africa. I think
organs. I was gonna say like organs being used in the
I
like
think
more
much,
keys being used in the music.
Mid to low tempo into versus like that. You have some of that, but that's like their fast songs.
But again, yeah, it doesn't sound like pop punk. That's kind of like a pop punk thing that you're doing right there.
And when I think third wave ska, I think zany colors, silly music videos, dumb band names, stupider band album titles, like just ridiculous. Like, and I love Skank and Pickle, but like that's what I think. Skank and Pickle. Are you serious? Like it's just so ridiculous sounding. The Aquabats, that third wave ska, bro, silly, zany. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, but this whole thing happened because I got sent a video. I get a lot of promotion stuff now. The channel's getting bigger, and people are sending me stuff. I appreciate it. I actually kind of love it, man. It makes me feel really humble. Like I don't know, like I'm doing my job right. And the other day, I'm not gonna say who it was because I don't want to sound like I'm being rude, but this person sent me a video, and I'm listening to the song, and when I hit play, I wish they hadn't sent me a video. Had I heard the song like this, song was good. Lyrics were pretty awesome, actually. As soon as I looked at the person, I was like, that is the exact person that would be playing a fucking ska song, man. Like, like not really cool enough. Like this is so gatekeepery, bro, but it is what it is. Like high school band is what I, the unbuttoned like floral shirt with like the jorts and a t-shirt on underneath it with like the checkerboard Vans, but wearing socks with them. And like the hat, like on top of the hair with the stupid sunglasses on. Like, but that song was really good. And I thought, man, if they would have just toned down the visuals, it would still have been that kind of era of music, whatever, that style of music. But like the song was pretty good. But visually, I just couldn't take it seriously.
Well, the ska, like true believers, they're like very into ska. They're really into that, exactly like that aesthetic that you're saying too. Like they really have adopted that going on. Have you ever seen the documentary, the one that Tim narrates?
Yes, I have.
Pick it up or whatever. Again, I was mentioned that to that. That's a good thorough background on a lot of the American ska and some of the roots. And one of the things that it notes in there too is how ska died in the U.S. in the early '90s, but really picked up in a lot of other places around the world once it died in the U.S. It just makes sense because of the rock band construct doesn't necessarily fit as well with ska, but you think of how music is in all these other places with organs, with horns, with these polka rhythms, all these other stuff fit a lot of non-Western music very, very well. And I think that makes sense.
Especially Latin countries and African countries. Like the stuff you're hearing from Africa and from Latin America, it's already zesty enough, just their music. So when you get a band together, they are easily going to put a guitar in there, and then all of a sudden it becomes like a ska band because it's actually a ska band, and it's not just because ska came from like rhythm and blues music and pop music. It didn't come from punk,
Yeah.
And so, we kind of adopted it because it became part of skinhead culture. That's a whole other podcast that we can talk about. But like, it's interesting, man. I just thought it was a really good topic for a talk, man. I think that third wave ska is an important thing. It helped a lot of bands make a lot of money, which is unfortunately necessary. I mean, money's good for these guys. They need to make a living. And a lot of bands that maybe wouldn't have ever gotten the recognition they deserved got it when that happened. So, I mean, I'll take the No Doubts. I'll take the Real Big Fish, whatever, man. I'm not tripping, dude. Real Big Fish has a few really great songs, actually. So I'm not even.
I do forget about it though as a genre sometimes because like when I think of like the Less Than Jakes and some of those, I just think of it as pop punk bands, kind of that,
right?
And not necessarily from a musical. Like if you ask me, like, oh yeah, that's like a ska, a very ska heavy pop punk band. But I ultimately think those bands like are like in the long run probably pop punk bands. Like I think Goldfinger in the long run is probably The
Well,
contribution
Goldfinger is definitely
pop-punk.
not a ska punk band. Like they have a couple of ska songs. They are not a ska
Yeah,
band.
a lot of the
like,
world would probably say like if they said like if you didn't know what ska was, that's a band I think would be one of the first bands that would come out of people's mouths as far as like a band that a lot of people know that they know was kind
that
of
might be the
adjacent to
case, but
that.
that goes right in with the no doubt thing. Like that just means that they're ignorant, and I don't
Right, but
it
it
is
also
what it
goes
is.
but it also goes to the perception of the genre and how the how the
Yeah,
genre
perception
gets.
is that doesn't. This is where we disagree on the way things are a little bit. Like I don't perception doesn't matter to me. Like I don't care about that. It doesn't because I'm looking at it from a different perspective. Like I'm looking at it from inside of it, and so what the other world thinks doesn't really
But
matter.
my question always on that, then why categorize stuff? Like if it doesn't matter, because if it's only how it is kind of objectively, why do we make categories for stuff?
Organization is why I do it.
Huh.
Conversation, like it's just because I want to. Like I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. That's a good answer.
Why wouldn't I do that? Just because I don't agree with the mass. Well, we're punk rockers. Why would we agree with everybody? Of course we don't agree. I'm fucking stubborn. I'm gonna do what I want. Fucking because that's who I am. But yeah, I mean, it makes it easier to categorize things. Makes it easier to organize things. And just just to and also descriptive words help. I mean, when you're talking to a 16-year-old kid about, hey, what kind of stuff are you into? Like as an example, at my store, that's the only way I can actually ask people stuff, man. I'm like, hey, so what are you into? I like ska stuff. Okay, well, what bands do you like? Are you familiar with this band, this band, this band? No, I'm not. Well, here, let me put something on, and then I let them hear it, and I go, oh, I like that one. Well, that's how I know what to get you. Is like, oh, they like third wave ska. They like third wave ska. Fuck, who knows? Maybe they do want a No Doubt album.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I can also get them. Listen, Jake, Real Big Fish, just tons of stuff. Maybe even get them into Rancid stuff. So it helps a lot. But the general public is the general public. They don't care about this stuff. So when they hear it, Goldfinger, it's like, well, no, but what? Sure, whatever, guy, because they don't care. They're the only thing that they've ever heard any ska music on is a Tony Hawk game. So
yeah, probably. I wonder if you actually polled like Americans, like where's the place you've heard ska the most? Probably the Tony Hawk video game. Like that's.
Bro, I'm on fire tonight, bro. I'm firing on all cylinders. I just ate dinner, so my belly's full, and my brain's not.
Pre-show you were like a melted, candle over here. That now you're firing on all cylinders. Jeez.
Let's talk about the Suicide Machines. Battle Hymn. Let's see here. I can't remember what year it came out on. Hold on.
96, I want to say.
96. I think it was like April 96, but it's 22 songs and 32 minutes. So it's normally a song length that I don't want to have nothing to do with. But the album length is perfect. It's 32 minutes. So it's a little daunting to look at it. Shout out to George if you're watching this. Use the word daunting today in a thing. So it's a little it's a very good word. Mm-hmm. So it's a little overwhelming to look at it and go, man, 22 songs. And then if you look at the runtime, you're like, oh, never mind. This is going to be awesome. This is going to be right up my alley. And so today I listened to it again. I listened to it twice in this past week because it was so short. And so there's a funny story about this album. When it came out, I was like, was it 96 or 98? 98, because 96 was the other one.
98, you're right.
So, okay, that's what I thought. Okay, I was 16. And I had just turned 16. My birthday's in March, and this came out in April. So my dad had me a couple weeks after my birthday. And so he's like, hey, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I said, it's really interesting to remember this stuff because I don't have a lot of my memory is just so poor, but I don't have a lot of memories of my dad at all because he just wasn't around a lot. But I remember going, I want to go pick up some new music. And he's like, all right, cool. And he gives me whatever money. I think it was a couple $100. And he's like, let's go. And you just go hog wild, man. And I took me to 2 record stores. So shout out to Vinyl Edge in Houston, which is still around. But Diamond Head Records on Louetta, which is no longer around. I went to Vinyl Edge first. I got a couple of things. I don't remember what they were. But the reason I remember Diamond Head is because when I walked in, they had a new Suicide Machines album. And the guy goes, hey, I was holding this for you. And he's like, I only got 1 copy. And I knew you'd want this. And I was like, oh, my goodness. I was like, I didn't know this was coming out. And he's like, yeah, I told you I had something coming. It was this. And so I buy it. I even can tell you it was $14.99. I remember it very, very clearly, dude. But I remember I'm on the way to church. Oddly enough, it's still the same church building that if I was going to go to church, it's where I'd go right now. I go occasionally to go hang out with my mom, my sister, but we just live over here now. It's weird. But I remember going in my dad's car, unwrapping a CD, and I had a Discman. And I remember I had about 15 minutes of driving. I could listen to the album. And I remember hitting play and hating it.
No.
I hated it. I was like, yo, what? Now, after a few listens, because back then, we've talked about this before, I had limited money. So when you bought an album, that is a commitment.
You lived with it, yeah.
You lived with it. So I listened to it a few more times out of the necessity of having just a few albums. And I understood it after like maybe the third or fourth listen. I was like, okay, I get it now. It's that, they weren't, I didn't understand this back then, but they weren't on a indie label. So they had major label money. Mm-hmm. So back then what I understood is like, okay, they just want to sound as good as they can sound. And this is as good as they sound. They don't sound better on any other album. Destruction by definition may have better songs. It doesn't sound as good as this album. This album sounds perfect. Like just objectively. I still prefer their first record as far as just sonically noises that you hear. But this album is so crisp and clean, and the drumming is freaking amazing. And the it's more of a hardcore record almost. It's got so many like hard punk songs on it.
Yeah, it's in a more traditional way of talking about it, you would say it's more inaccessible maybe than the opening album, although I feel like it's a little more refined.
Isn't that crazy?
The first album is a first album. Like I think you put it, and I prefer that album too, because and part of that's like a little bit of a familiarity bias with I'm just more familiar with that album.
Right.
But like this one I was like, man, it's not as there are some poppy songs, but the last one is more that, again, what we were talking about, that poppy ska punk. This is like a ska punk that's more mixed with, I was thinking of, like you said, hardcore. I was thinking of more like skate punk, more of like those kind of elements that you and I really like.
He yells in this. He doesn't sing at all hardly. So when you're yelling, that's hardcore.
It's a very heavy, it's like a very heavy album, and very intense. And then with those song lengths, I think it kind of adds to it, because I think a whole record of this, because there's a lot packed into these songs. I think like if all these songs were like full length songs and you didn't get like a 4-second song and a bunch of 1-minute songs,
there was two things. That was the end of side A and side B.
I think it would wear you out. You know what I mean? Like, but it doesn't, because the song lengths are so short, and they're such a high energy band. They maintain that. They just kind of express it a little bit different than they do in the first album. To me, seems more like it's built on other older influences. There's a lot more like classic punk too in the first one. Where that's
a good observation.
Yeah, I think this one really sounds like they've listened to a lot of stuff, and that kind of some of that intense 90s stuff and some of that. So like they've sort of incorporated a lot of that into there, or they've taken other influences, from the 80s, from maybe New York or wherever, and put that in there.
Well, I think it was the drummer of this band has like a death metal band. And I think he came into this band around this time, because if I'm not mistaken, it was Derek from Alkaline Trio that was the drummer on the first album.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's the same guy from this album. I think, as a matter of fact, let me look that up. Hold on.
Yeah, you got it. Credited. He's credited on this album.
Is he really?
Yeah. I know, but because there's that song Independence Parade was about him leaving. So I'm not really sure. I thought he was gone on this album too. So maybe it's kind of like the Derek Grant situation now in some ways,
right?
In that he recorded the last album, but it's not really one that he takes ownership from a tour perspective.
Okay, so they had whenever Suicide Machines went on hiatus, two of the guys had a band called Left in Ruin. So it was a side project for quite a while. So they had other influences. I think they just leaked into this album, because this album is incredibly heavy. So you go from poppier ska, skate punk stuff to like hardcore. Honestly, it sounds more like Leftover Crack and Choking Victim, because it's got that really heavy sounds that it's cleaner, more refined. But
it's got the vibe of that heavy Hellcat stuff. Very much.
Yes,
it's very much that real dangerous sounding, like those people that are all criminals from the Hellcat side of things. It kind of sounds like that.
You know what's crazy, for real? What's crazy about this record is it mirrors the Destruction by Definition and Battle Hymns mirror Let's Go and Out Come the Wolves so well, because you have this grittier, dirtier sound with the other albums, and then when you go into Out Come the Wolves and Battle Hymns, there's a crisper, better production. I just thought it was an interesting parallel. They just kind of remind me of that pair of albums. They just kind of go together, and also you have a departure from their normal sound with their following album. Where you have Life Won't Wait, and then you have Self-Titled 2000, like two albums that are very different from their previous catalog. These bands were following the same like timeline kind of, with their careers.
Yeah,
I think a lot of bands do that though.
And then they kind of settle back into their roots for
Right.
once they're back on side one dummy. Like,
Yep.
like where I found them, they weren't that interesting to me because they were just kind of that, like, as we think of the Suicide Machine, I was kind of unaware of some of this evolution, really till we started doing the research, for
Isn't that wild? Yeah, this is stuff that I've been aware of for a long time because Suicide Machines were one of the first 3 bands I ever discovered. So like they're really important to me, just as my journey as a punk rock fan. They were at a very early, entry point for me. Thank goodness they were on a big label, because all the people gripe about these big labels, dude. These big labels, while they are a terrible, disgusting machine, they do serve a purpose, man. Like, I don't know where I would have been without that stuff, without NoFX and Rancid being in Best Buy because they had good distribution. Like, I don't know, man. Where would I end up listening to Garth Brooks and shit? Like, I don't know.
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd have been a lot harder to find as much underground music as you did without them having some of these mass distribution channels or associations with other bands that kind of lead you there. All of that stuff. Absolutely. I mean, that's pretty wild that this was on a major label though still. I mean, even the last album it's not like it doesn't fit. The last album, parts of it kind of sounds like a movie soundtrack album.
Listen, Jake. It reminds me of Listen, Jake, but better.
Yeah, it's clearly of that. It's amazing that this was on a major label. Just because you don't think of this type, it's not like in the late 80s, there's a lot of really heavy music on major labels, but a lot of it is like metal and these other kind of stuff. Punk, to the extent that it's on major labels, was mostly the very like MTV friendly punk, which this could like almost go into. I think on the Wikipedia page it makes a note there's a song that was on a Disney Channel show that came off of this album. It's one of those things though, like when you get the album, it's fully like rated R though. When you get the album, the trimmings of it aren't, but when you dive into it, there's a lot there. Now I'm kind of curious too. Do you think they made a new sound? Or are they one of the sound kind of like the I don't know how you wanted to describe it.
I'm sorry, repeat that beginning of the question. I got an urgent message. I'm sorry.
Do you think they're a band that made a new sound or kind of made new sound the way like Operation Ivy did? Or are they one that more combined like ska and punk and just sort of presented them simultaneously?
I think that I don't want to use the word perfected, but improved upon a sound that was already there. Because they are a direct descendant of Operation Ivy. Like, if you don't have Op Ivy, you simply do not have the Suicide Machines as we know them today. And so, therefore, I can't say that they started a sound, because there's only so many times that you can start a new sound. And we're going to talk about that again in a few minutes, too, because I got a whole thing I did about Tim Armstrong, and he's done that a couple of times. But, yeah, man, it's interesting. I think that they're a very high quality band, and I think on this album there's a lot of high quality songs, man. I honestly kind of forgot how many songs off this record I absolutely love. I mean, every time I would look at the thing, I'd be like, yeah, that song's awesome. The only songs I don't care for are the 2 songs that are 7 seconds apiece, and it's like punk, and then when it goes dun ja, like, I get it, you're ska punk, I get it, that's what they're doing, and so I get it. But I don't need those. I hate intros. I hate outros. I don't like stuff like that. So that stuff's just not for me. Yeah. But all the songs on here are so stinking good, man. So you're basically looking at 20 songs in 31 and a half minutes. And that's a great clip for somebody like me. But I mean, I can't even tell you what songs I love on here, because every freaking song has got a check mark next to it. This whole album is fantastic, man.
I think it gets really strong at like between 6 through 9, between High Society and Confused, like right.
Well, I just was going to say, I wrote down High Society, Pins and Needles. Yeah. I said it's got a really good swanky melody, rhythm, great lyrics for High Society. And then Pins and Needles is just a straight hardcore song. And then I put, this album is full of the classic songs this album, is not full of the classic songs, quote unquote, that their first album is, but it's almost just as good in my opinion. And then I put example, Confused is a fantastic song with a super heavy chorus. Like, I don't think that would have been in their first record. But after you hear the song DDT, I realized that this album is just all around much heavier than Destruction by Definition, and I really appreciate that. It's got a lot in common with Leftover Crack. That's awesome that I was able to pull that out and recognize the similarities there. I also liked Step One is a really good song, but every song on the album is good, man. Like, there is no like fluff on the record except the 2 little tiny things, but those are like seconds apiece, so you really can't consider them anything.
They don't really take up much, so they don't really mess anything up. I think vocally too, it's very.
His vocals are fantastic on this album.
It is, and I think that's where there's a lot of the Op Ivy. There's a lot of the way Jess sang on that initial album with the different ranges and stuff that I think is very prevalent on this album. That's
okay.
Like, we don't think of Jess Michaels necessarily as this big tastemaker because he's only made one album that we kind of interact with as in the public. But I think there's a lot of that. The way the vocals carry a lot of the things that I think would have been produced out of like Operation Ivy, maybe had they gone like a little bit further. And I think it's hit really well. I've always liked that about the Suicide Machines in general.
Well, his vocals are fantastic. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no,
I think this is probably his best vocal performance.
He has to do a lot because there's a lot going on this album. Because we've said it doesn't overstay its welcome, but there's a lot of songs, and these songs do have a fair amount of range within the very the.
Is it just one dude singing? I thought it was two.
Yeah, isn't it two? Like, isn't it? It's the one dude who sings like he had like those long dreadlocks at one point, and then
then the other guy's the screamer guy, right?
Yeah, but I'm also in my brain I'm also confusing them and Less Than Jake for some reason, so I'm not sure if I'm getting that right.
Because they look the same. Let's see. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, Jason Navarro is their singer. Yeah, that's the dude. With
and then Dan, the guy Dan fella is their other vocalist.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think. Man, when you can blend your vocals together so well that somebody's been listening to you for 30 years can't figure out who's singing what. I've only seen them twice. It was a long time ago. I'm going to go see them again in a couple of weeks, and I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, it's a good band that really, I think, at least on this album, knew themselves and how to play off each other really well too. Like you get the feeling, and I've, like I said, I've seen them live once, and I've seen quite a bit of footage of them live. They're a pretty fun band. They do have that sort of the infectiousness of that Operation Ivy kind of energy, and again, a more like adult oriented show in the way like with some of his banter in between and stuff, and some of the jokes he tells. It's a pretty fun overall performance.
Let's see. All right. I was trying to find something, but I can't find it. It's all right. I'll move on. We'll get something. Yeah. Well, okay. So overall, how did you feel about the record? You weren't that familiar with it.
Yeah,
correct?
Yeah. I'd seen the cover before, but I was more. I guess I more popped in on the first album and then the War Profiteering. That one was like kind of when I again kind
that's
of
a good album too, though.
What I would have.
That one sounds more like the first record.
Yeah. So that was a little bit more of my perception of the band, somewhat other than from the live performances. I want to kind of just dive into this more. Like this was fun to put on the radar because again, Suicide Machines is a band I like. And I consider them very much in the positive category, but I haven't spent a ton of time listening to them, and it's just like one of those things like. What am I doing? Right? I'm sitting here doing nothing. Why don't I just get into the Suicide Machines more? So that's why there's things sometimes in this podcast where we come from like the authoritative place or for this where it's kind of like I'm kind of learning about this. And like this is a lot of what I like in music. It's got a lot of the like I said, a lot of the I wouldn't say necessarily like the skate or the hardcore vibes, like you were saying. It's got a lot of that part that I really do like in music with enough songwriting and touch and stuff like that to still make it a pretty good listen where it's not like redundant, like, well, why don't I just go listen to Pennywise if I wanted to listen to the same stuff over and over? It's not that same. It's a very underrated band.
I think so too.
I don't know I don't know a lot about them and their bio. It's, again, another one that I now have way more of a curiosity about, like their rise and fall. Because I've always thought of them as a generally successful band, but because I was unaware that they were ever a major label band, I've always thought of them as a pretty big, indie band.
Right. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that there's just okay. So I had a thought and I couldn't pull it back. Man. I need to start writing my thoughts down on a notepad or something so I can remember like bullet points and things. So with this record, when you're listening to it, it's very heavy at times, and for like long stretches. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of like 2 and 3 songs in a row where it's like heavy, heavy, heavy. And just when you're like, man, I don't know if I want to hear this heavy, I was kind of looking for something a little lighter. It drops in something that's just super melodic and poppy at just the right time. I think these dudes do the going from hardcore to like ska as good as anybody else has ever done it. And that includes the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, who I think are probably like the the leader in that subcategory. You can't really do much better than the Boss Tones with, going from super heavy, fast music to straight ska chords. But these dudes perfect that as well, I would say.
And can chameleon in a way where, like, when they do a song like from the first album, like New Girl, again, that just could be a less than Jake song. Like
Right.
They're good enough for like the beach and for like the dingy club. They're very very dynamic that way. Yeah.
So before we talk about Rancid a little bit,
Yeah.
how did you like the 2000 album, dude? What a departure from their sound.
Didn't.
You don't like it?
No, to me, this is what I don't like about like pop music or like this stuff that's maybe more adjacent forms of music. Because I thought that's what this was. This
was
like
a power pop album. Yeah,
this is more like, again, like a pop band that comes through and maybe puts a little bit of ska and a little bit of pop punk into their music. I very much got vibes of like Fastball and like all those like late 90s alternate Bare Naked Ladies, even though it didn't really sound like that.
Wow.
It just kind of felt like that. It felt like that time period, and it is around that time period, but it sort of has that vibe of just that kind of post alternative, like after grunge, after ska, when new metal's still going around, before pop punk has really like hit, which I guess like power pop is the sort of rolling definition that we kind of put that type of music in.
Right.
And I just don't like necessarily that style. I don't like light alternative, I guess, is kind of what I'm getting at. And this kind of sounds like that to me.
Yeah, it's such a strange album because it doesn't sound anything like them, but I really do enjoy it. When I first heard it, though, I just completely stopped listening to the band altogether. Like, I was like, well, I'm not a fan of theirs anymore. Like, I was like, this is terrible. And as an adult, like when I turned in, like, my 30s and whatnot,
yeah,
I went back to it and was like, oh, this is pretty good, man. Like, I understand why they did it too. They were getting pigeonholed. And they were put into this like box of like, you have to sound like this. And they're like, yeah, but we have other interests. And the label, to my understanding, was like, well, no, but we want another Destruction by Definition. And they're like, that's literally why we called the album that. Like, what the shit, man? And they were just like, no, we're going to go write what we want to write. And that's what they did, is they produced that. I may be understanding that wrong, but that's the way I understand it happening. Anybody's got any more information than that? If I'm wrong, tell me. I'd love to actually know, like, actual what happened. I'm speculating based on some things that I've heard. So
yeah, and it's not a very well chronicled band for being, again, like a band on a major label and a band that's a pretty big indie
that's
band.
why they're not well chronicled, though. It's because when you're on a major label, you're just another band. If you're on if this band was on Epitaph or Fat, there would be DVDs about them all over the place.
No, and that's a huge distinction. I think you're exactly right. You're not cared about as much. We just
at all.
And not to say we don't like you. They're just there isn't that same level of
they're not part of the scene. They're there for money only.
Yeah, whereas, it's just not the same. It's just you don't have the same sort of investment. So I think like a lot of people like us don't feel the need to do such in-depth research, to do so many YouTube videos like this stuff. And those bands in that category, there's also the bands like these days that you can't find vinyl of because that stuff came out on majors and it's controlled. It's just a little bit. It's a layer that's always kind of there. Which again, whereas like the Epitaph and the Lookout stuff, we can like just celebrate that as like historical art that we'll just forever be talking about and creating new knowledge and new books and all that. I would like to get to know more about them because they seem interesting enough, at least based on their music and then their stage show. And I have seen them in documentaries. They just tend to be talking about other bands. I've noticed even when they're in documentaries,
I feel like Less Than Jake fits the mold of a major label ska punk band.
Yeah.
And Suicide Machines does not. Suicide Machines are a political band. They are a anti-racist band. They are anti-sexist. They're very much of the punk rock ilk.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Less Than Jake, I don't mean to upset anybody here, but those dudes are just trying to be rock stars. When I went and listened to Chris DeMake's talk at the Punk Rock Museum, it was abundantly clear to me how much he didn't know. And that's not out of disrespect. That guy's done things I'll never accomplish. He was also very, very nice. I don't mean that. It's an observation I made. I thought, man, I thought he'd know this, and he just didn't. He didn't even understand that the Reagan Youth album cover was like ironic.
Mm-hmm.
So like, he's not a like crusty punk, street punk guy. That's all I meant by that. So people that are going to take that the wrong way are just not really listening. So my apologies to anybody that actually was upset by that. I didn't mean to upset anybody, but it's just like, that's not really what that band was trying to do. They weren't trying to be a DIY punk band. Whereas I think Suicide Machines kind of fit that mold a little bit. It's all in their lyrics. It's in their aura. They're all about that stuff.
Yeah, and I think about their live show. I think of all like the sermons them giving in the middle of about police reform, police brutality, and imperialism.
Right.
All the punk rock stuff.
And that's all I meant by that. I didn't.
Yeah.
I know it sounds like a dig at Less Than Jake. I just happened to. I was there. I saw it. I've known about that band for years and years and years. I've listened to them for almost as long. And so whenever I met him, I was a little surprised because you have this idea who these people are, and so.
I would assume a band like the Suicide Machines is probably like the beneficiary of the third wave ska, of that stuff being so big that there was just money to go around. So a band like that could
That's
sign
exactly right.
to a major, which again, I don't think that majors in the 90s, that doesn't surprise me as much because there's a lot of aggro music on majors in the 90s, but Suicide Machines specifically, not a lot of that. That seemed like it would come out of like Europe or something if it were to break.
I can already see the guy in the office. He's like, hey, I just heard this new band called Rancid, and there's this thing called No Doubt, and there's this thing called Sublime. Dude, find any band you can find that sounds like this. And some guy comes in and goes, I saw these dudes in Detroit last night, and hands him a demo tape. And he goes, good enough for me. Sends them a contract. They're like, all right, boom, done. You know what I'm saying? Because that album that I showed you the other week, I listened to some of it. I haven't gone through all of it yet. I can totally understand how when those songs were made, that if a guy that had a budget was listening to it in 1995, was like, hold up, bring me these guys. Because they're charismatic. They write catchy music. Their singing is just fine. Like, you can understand what they're saying. Even when he's screaming, you can understand what he's saying. And that's huge. So yeah, I think they got lucky. Whereas I think Less Than Jake, and even Krista Makes even talks about it in the video that I put up, where he's talking about like their record deal, how he wished he had signed with Fat and not the majors, because they would have been a different band and like they would have had more respect in the punk community. I do think that's a little weird that he worded it like, I don't know, man, whatever. But like, I think that they were headed towards a major, wanted to get there, and I think that Suicide Machines was just like, oh, okay, because it's what it sounds like to me, anyways, based on their music.
Well, and
Less Than Jake is an awesome band, and they have 2 albums that I would call 10 out of 10 perfect. So I'm not like talking shit. I love Less Than Jake. I would like their shirt. I wear a shirt. I go to their shows. Like, I'm not tripping. Truth is truth. So
yeah, and there was like, let's face it, there was only like one Green Day. There was only one Offspring, but it's not like these guys were delusional. If you're signing a major label deal in the mid '90s to think like, oh, I might also have like generational wealth based on the music I'm making.
No, there's nothing delusional about that.
Yeah, no, that's and it really kind of dovetails into what we're going to talk about with the next topic. It's a pretty rational decision, I think, for a lot of those guys.
Absolutely.
To do that. Now, on the flip side, what you're saying is, and you've heard all these ex-A&R guys talk about it, like, what is it, like the 5-to-1 ratio or whatever? This is how dumb the business model was for major labels, is you're going to put money in behind 5 bands. One of them's going to make it. The other ones are going to be starved out. They're going to owe you advances. It's a really bad model, but, it's
sort of, because
famine.
I have a label, dude. And I can tell you, I put out 10 records last year. Guess what number of them did really well?
Most of them? Or
no,
none of them?
2. 5-to-1, buddy. It's the same number. Now, my end game and my goals are different, because my goals don't have nothing to do with being rich. My goals have something to do with bringing music to people and letting them hear it, supporting the band and getting the band something that they need. That's all I care about. So, like, I'm looking at it from a different perspective, but it's the same outcome,
Yeah.
And it's not even that the bands aren't good. That's never the case. Even with the majors.
Though. It's such a lottery.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a lottery. So like, even with the majors and even with my label, every record I put out was good. I wouldn't have put the money behind them if they weren't good. But certain things, it's all about chance. And so like, okay, that's an example. Generation Exit, I put their tape out. I've been listening to Chris Klink play music for 25 years. He is literally one of my top 2 or 3 favorite vocalists of all time, and now become a close friend of mine. I would put 10 grand behind that guy's music if I need to. I don't give a shit if they sell a single unit. But when it dropped, it had an initial like pop, because it was a new thing that I was putting out. So it sold pretty decent. And then it slowed down. Well, in the last few weeks, people are getting their hands on it, and I'm getting like a lot of feedback. Dude, this is really good. I'm like, I told y'all it was really good. It just depends, man. There's nothing you can do about it. It's either going to sell well or it's not. And a lot of stuff that sucks sells well because they have a lot of money to put behind it. So like, it ain't good or bad isn't even really what you're talking about. You're talking about luck or no luck.
Yeah, and it's funny because you just can't predict what the public will like either. That's also
Yeah, right, right.
that's also the
Well,
thing
I
about
mean,
it.
I will say this though. Offspring and Green Day were like part luck, but there was a lot of talent between those like 8
Mhm.
guys. Like a lot. Like a
Yeah,
lot.
you
So
can't
like
you can't claim to say luck. There's a difference between luck and just like happen like luck like extreme luck would be like you and I signing a major label deal tomorrow. That
right.
would be like
I
oh
get some random sponsorship with like Walmart. I would never sign that, but whatever. Some big giant company tomorrow.
yeah, I'm trying to think the punk bands we like are all too
Dude,
good.
I'm like Disney wouldn't sign that either. I'm like Walmart wouldn't sign that. Apple wouldn't sign that. Dude, what would I'll never get a sponsorship deal because I'm probably not going to sign to somebody that I don't stand firm with, and there's not very many companies out there that I stand up for.
Yeah, brand
So
deals are
yeah, so if you want to
dick.
sponsor a video with your band or something, holler at your boy. It's super cheap.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what I mean by the luck. It's more of a, I guess, a draw would more be of kind of how you
yeah,
would
I just
you would spit it. And yeah, there is factors. It's not like if Green Day was lazy, I don't think they would have made it. If the Offspring had bad songs, they
right.
wouldn't
I
have made
just
it.
think that the Green Day and the Offspring that we have, no matter where they landed, they would have made it to a certain degree. But
Mm,
there was a certain amount of luck in them making it to the like insane astronomical level that they did make it. Like they would have
yeah.
always made it, but they weren't always going to be Green Day and Offspring unless they got some luck. Because,
Mm,
dude, I mean, seriously, like look at some of the stuff they threw away. Look at some of the stuff that they didn't do. Look at them changing their name to Green Day. Like that, honestly, sorry if I heard that. Butterfly effect, man. You change your name to a different thing, that sets in motion a different set of events that could have happened had you not done that. So, there is some luck involved, but those
oh,
guys would have always
tons.
made it because they were fantastic musicians and songwriters and performers.
Hmm.
Oh man, that was actually way more fun talk than I thought it was going to be. It lasted
Yeah,
longer than I thought it would.
yeah, very very deep on like kind of a broader conversation on Scott
Right.
Punk and all that. Yeah.
So let's talk about Rancid for a minute because we
All
don't do
right.
that near enough over
No,
here.
never. Are we both
Let's,
wearing Rancid shirts today? Did we
yes.
do that? Okay,
Yep,
cool.
we did that.
All right.
Let's go. Speaking of let's go. Okay.
Segue.
Oh man. Give me 1 second. I gotta look something up real quick.
All right.
I know. I've just taken all the momentum and just
Yeah, see, that's what you got to do, guys. If you're ever running, just put a brick wall in front of you and run right into it. Not like
You know what I'm
Rancid
saying?
says on Indestructible. You're not going to run through it. You just run into it and you'll fall back down, but you probably won't get up because you're hitting a freaking brick wall. So,
Okay. So June 21st of
mm,
1994. So
geez,
like in 10
almost.
days from now, 10 days is literally the 30th anniversary of Rancid Let's Go. This album has been a weird one for this channel and us two fellas here. So yeah, dude. You know what? You start this conversation, Rob. I don't even want to talk about it.
Okay, do we want to go from that jumping off point of the weirdness?
Let's start there. So June
Okay.
21st, 1994, they give us an album that's 23 songs, 44 and a half minutes in length. That is a major point on this record, is that it's 45 minutes long and 23 songs. That's where you and I were having our initial issues with their album, is that it was just so long.
Yeah, and I hold on. Excuse me. Jeez.
Bless you.
I hold on to that even after going through and having a week of really loving Let's Go. Like this has been like Let's Go week theme and like my Spotify.
Right.
Because it's like, hey, let's have fun listening to Let's Go. So I would still probably put it, if I had to really sit down, as my the second best Rancid album ever. I think it still can hold that spot. It is a little too long, and I think it's the second part of the album just I don't find as good as the first. But again, those songs that you'd be cutting off, I think that's a good EP. Like I think that would still be very good. I just think they put everything they had onto this album. So and at the time though, I don't think that was a criticism. I think that is very much, this is a criticism. We're judging this off of our modern attention span, off of their entire, I think we're judging this off of a lot of stuff in retrospect. So I don't think the album should really be like super downgraded based on what we were saying. I think we're more providing context of why we are feeling that way. Also, and we should just put this out there. this is also just the problem of like being contrasted with other stuff. The problem with Let's Go is you have to contrast it to the band I got on my shirt, right? Or to the album I got on my shirt right here with And Out Come the Wolves. That is like a ridiculous standard to uphold. When we did our Rancid song ranking, we both talked about how we had to sort of accommodate and move some Out Come the Wolves songs out of there just to make it a listenable. Yeah, because honestly, I would go, if I had like my old time list, like the most objective version, not the one that's a good podcast and a good discussion, but it would be like Roots Radical, Radio, and then like most of the songs from Out Come the Wolves. I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. I just think objectively, those are all the best songs that band did. That band's a very good band. All their albums are very good. Their worst album is better than most bands' best album. I just think in comparison to that, this one's a little bit tinier. It's an extremely significant album with a ton of really good songs and gems. Because it's so long, I think a lot of different Rancid fans have probably the experience that I've had over the years. Well, like, I remember this one in my truck all the time was always like a skip around one. Even back then, like I say, our perspective on it being too long is a modern one. I think we view that as a problem. I just know back even in the day, I would kind of jump around on this album a little bit. So I am unfamiliar with like some of the songs for an album I've listened to a whole hell of a lot.
So, okay, we had a good run here, man. We had like probably 8 weeks where we didn't hardly disagree on anything.
Oh.
Tonight's been our disagree night. We've disagreed on a bunch of stuff. And so I think I disagree on the what side of the album is better. I don't know that I would say that side A is necessarily not as good, but I think side B is incredibly strong. There's only one song on this album that I can't listen to, and it's the second to last song called Name. I just don't care for it. I don't care for it.
I mean, I think that'd be the worst song in the album. Like without, like you're saying it off the top of your head. I was like, yeah, the song before 7 Years Down. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. You so
don't know that. Yeah, it's just
you don't know my name. So, but it gets stuck in your head. So I guess it did its job, right? Uh-huh. So the album's long. So before we go into in-depth talk about this album, I just did a 12-minute video on Tim Armstrong. We talked about it earlier about like sounds changing and sounds being like made and a new thing. Bro, Tim Armstrong has done that 3 times. That's insane that one person has made basically a new sound 3 different times, and that people have tried to replicate it, and nobody has really come that close. Mm-hmm. There is no band that is as good or sounds as good as Operation Ivy in that subgenre. I'm sorry, it just doesn't exist. Rancid has a literal sound. They've got the Rancid sound. It's a California Rancid sound. People try to emulate it. We got the Interrupters, we got the Distillers, we got Left Alone. Lots of bands try. None of them really quite capture the magic that Rancid does. My man gets bored and starts a whole ass new genre with the Transplants. And again, nobody can emulate that. I just wanted to just say that again because I think it's crazy. I think it's insane. And that tells you a lot about this album. So, okay. This is where one of my points is that this is where that sound, the Rancid sound, starts to formulate. It starts to come up from this. Lars joins the band. They have a thicker, more full sound with a lot more lead guitar. They go from that gritty sound to a little more like, I don't want to say poppy, but it is. It is kind of, it's got like a pop sensibility to it that wasn't on their first record. And I think that Tim was starting to kind of come into his own as a songwriter. Like Operation Ivy's got a lot of pop in it. He had it back then. In between Operation Ivy and Rancid, we have Downfall. Have you heard Downfall?
Yeah, I mentioned it quite a bit a year ago when I did my Operation Ivy video too on the channel. We listened to quite a bit of Downfall.
Oh, dude. So first off, anybody's interested in having like an official Downfall cassette, holler at your boy. I'm making some official bootlegs. Artwork and everything. It's going to be awesome. I'm very excited. It's just like a little passion project I'm doing, like all hands on. I'm not doing anything like insane. I'm making like 10 copies of it. But, I figured like 8 people might want one of those. I just don't want that music to go anywhere because it sounds like a really good amalgamation of the two bands. It sounds more like Operation Ivy, but it still sounds like you can hear
where the Rancid sound comes from. Yeah, it's the closest I think of all the between Dancehall Crashers and everything they did in between Op Ivy and Rancid. It's the one that most sounds like Rancid, but it's clearly connected to Op Ivy. It's a nice bridge.
So good. that could have been another Op Ivy album. It's that good, and it would have held up with energy.
And really, it was just the only reason, like maybe why that doesn't become the band that ended up taking off was because of Tim's issues. Like that was really the case there.
Right.
It's not like they were like a bad band or any of those bands were necessarily like look what Dancehall Crashers went on to do right after them. You know what I mean? So
facts, 100%. And so Let's Go has a lot of. I don't know, man. We have complained about Let's Go a lot because it was a little long. It's a little monotony, if you ask me. That's the word I'll use. It's a little monotone because it has a sound that goes pretty much all the way through it. There's no ska on there. There's a couple of songs of Lars, a couple of songs of Matt, but it's mostly Tim.
It's not matured yet into the like the Rancid thing yet. It's not quite there. It's almost there.
It's infancy.
It's right there. Yeah, because there's songs on there. And I think that's probably my distinction with the two sides of the album, where I kind of feel like that first side is stuff that would be more like from a songwriting perspective that would fit a little smoother into the later albums. I do have a problem with the way it's set.
Dude, St. Mary, Dope Sick Girl, international cover. Those are like my favorites. Those are all side B.
I know. St. Mary would be on my.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Again,
I do it all the time. I argue with myself. I'm
Again, I'm thinking of Name, Motorcycle Ride, Harry
I like
Bridges,
Motorcycle Ride. I like Harry Bridges. I love
Ghetto
Harry
Box.
Bridges. I love Ghetto. Dude.
Those are the ones that I'm thinking of.
This album this week, dude. I haven't liked this album this much since I was a kid.
And I think a lot of the things though are like intentional choices that they kind of changed or got different. One thing I have in here is the fake Lemmy thing. They hadn't got it as good yet. Like,
what do you mean?
So there's always like the need for this kind of singing within Rancid, and
that's all Matt though.
But here's what I'm saying.
That's just how he sounds.
I know, but.
Okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of Matt. There's a lot of Matt vocally on the first album, and he plays a fairly significant role in this one. Going forward, you have Lars picking up a lot more of that vocal weight, and I just think he adds. He's got the same kind of thing. It's the gruff sort of gravelly thing that voice he's bringing into the band. But I think he takes that space in a way that just fits it more of. And again, I don't even know it's necessarily better.
He's a better singer.
But what I prefer in Rancid, I think at the same time, I think Matt gets not necessarily better, but what Matt does fits the songs even better. It's pretty amazing what he's doing here because he's driving a lot of these songs because he will always be the best musician, I think, in the band, just from a technical standpoint. But I think he's a lot more domineering on this. And he doesn't quite have the Operation Ivy thing on this album like he did, where he's creating those beats in Operation Ivy, which almost sound like a completely different song than the end product we're hearing. Where I feel like this, if you were to hear Matt play a lot of these solo on bass, the songs would be very recognizable because they carry a lot more of the songs, as you're saying, from like the monotone thing. So I think those things got better. Also, Tim's voice is almost reverse. Tim's voice is a little gruffer, or it's recorded a little bit different, I feel, on some of the songs on this album. Whereas when you go back to Operation Ivy or forward to Out Come the Wolves, it's a little bit different styling that he's using along with the gruffness. Now later on, he became a little gruffer as he got older and sort of adjusted that style. I think the style's a little more raw on Let's Go, so it adds that kind of charm to it. But I do kind of, it doesn't again, I'm really making the point of why Out Come the Woods is a great record, which is not what we're here to talk about. But I think it's a few of those things that are just slightly missing from, like I said, I think it just hasn't the cheese or whatever hasn't aged into its full form. Again, Lars is a big part of it. I think the thing that started it, that really kicks it off, is Brett is way more active in the recording of this album than he was. He gave him the platform for the opening album, but he was actually active in the production of this album. And I think a lot of times when you have these pop elements added to these punk bands, Brett is usually a pretty big factor in adding a lot of that stuff or making these into more accessibly sized songs.
You talk about Brett Gurwitz.
Yeah.
I, for whatever reason, thought you meant Brett Reed, and I was like, interesting. I did not know that.
No, Brett Reed was not the guy who put the pop into Rancid. I do not think.
Dude, I was like, I did not know that.
In this conversation, I should clarify. Yes, not the drummer Brett Reed, but the producer, Epitaph guy, Bad Religion guitarist Brett Gurwitz.
Okay, so okay, I haven't listened to this album Oh, okay. Remember a couple weeks ago when we talked about Enema of the State, and I said,
Yeah.
"Man, I just didn't really want to hear this album until I hit play, and then I heard it and was like, I was in." It was exactly the same thing that happened with this album. I didn't really feel like listening to it at all, and I got into my car and I was like, "Okay, I have a literal 45-minute drive to work. It's exactly the same length as this album. I'll just jump in the car, hit play, off to work." I sang the whole damn album. Like I had it cranked up, bro. I had a blast. So I think that this record, you couldn't get Outcome the Wolves without Let's Go. So for that reason alone, this deserves respect, right? I still don't know that I would rank it above some of the other albums, okay? But if you go song by song, it might be a better quality album than the other albums. Because
it's just a little fatter.
Yeah, but like, okay, so like percentage-wise, does this have more good songs than Indestructible? Yes. Dominoes? Yes. Maybe not for me, Troublemaker, but Honors All We Know? Yes. So it's like, okay, well then how do I say it doesn't fit? Because it's all subjective. It just depends on what you like. But man, there was urgency in this record. That's what the difference between Let's Go and Out Come the Wolves. There was urgency there, and Out Come the Wolves is much more like, let's write this beautiful piece of music.
It's a more of a poetic album, just generally.
This is a more punk rock record than Out Come the Wolves, but
it's a more of a youth album too. I think Out Come the Wolves is a little more like mature kind of.
Very much so.
Like again, the third song on there's about Wolverine on this one. So we're this is still teenager music. It's also the perspective is a little bit different lyrically because most of these songs are about Tim's experience through his alcoholism and his time at the Salvation Army, and a lot of that's being chronicled here. So it's kind of funny because you have like early Operation Ivy, and we talked about last week. It's very adolescent music, and that's kind of what gives it its charm. It's the music of kids. This is a little bit of the music of kids, but a kid who's been through a really rough experience the last couple of years.
Street kid.
Yeah. Again, not like a natural street kid in that kind of way but they did add a natural street kid in the band at this same time though, when they brought in Lars, which really gave I think a little bit of, and Matt and Tim will say like, we thought we were tough. And then Lars came in the band as far as this kind of thing, but also there's also the militantness of Rancid was already existed at this point. So Tim it was Tim's project to stay sober that Matt was keeping him in. They pick up the dysfunctional kid from the UK subs who gets really drunk and it makes everybody mad the first night they meet, and everyone wants him kicked out except for Tim, who's empathetic, which is okay. You guys gave me a chance. We got to give this guy a chance. They said it's the funniest thing. The hardcore punk rock band had like the most strict set of rules. Like if they even saw Lars with a beer, he'd be kicked out of the band. Like it was that kind of level of that kind of urgency, intensity, and insulation that they did.
Tim though,
yeah, and it is, but it did sort of create again that urgency that you're talking about. I think the identity of the band got like a lot of how people talk about Rancid, I think comes from this album even more so than Wolves, even though Wolves was a lot of people think of Rancid as in more generalized term of the gruff vocals and the spirit of 76 and all. Not that they didn't have that on Out Come the Wolves, they absolutely do. But I think a lot of those impressions of the werewolf lead singer and all that, a lot of that comes from this album because this is where we got in, most of the music public got introduced to Rancid through this album, not necessarily Out Come the Wolves. I'm trying to think of an analogy from another band, but this is the album that got them discovered. It wasn't their biggest album, but they got discovered based on this. And as we talked about, the whole theme of Out Come the Wolves was a reference to how popular they got, the major label Feeding Frenzy. Look when this came out. This came out a couple weeks ago for the anniversary. That means we're a couple weeks after Dookie and Smash have come out, and what we talked about earlier, there is money to go around. There's going to be, and you have these guys who used to be in this legendary band that was kind of a godfather to this genre that all the hipsters that are working at MTV and Spin Magazine really grew up listening to, that those same guys are in, and these guys are even cooler than like Larry Livermore said that the SoCal stuff, he called that baggy pants punk. Or baggy shorts punk. And I love that because you and I, as baggy shorts people who like a lot of skate punk, I think that's kind of fitting. And he thought of the San Francisco bands of Op Ivy, Rancid, Green Day. We talked about this last week as more like heartfelt and more like emotional and more sensitive. And he's 100% right, I think, with that. And the LA bands are more either intense and wanting to fight you, or they're sort of like intellectual and brainy, where Rancid is the street poets in the genre of the baggy pants or baggy shorts punk, you know.
It's one of these things that, like, I think that you had a really perfect scenario pop up because you have this album coming out. So it's already written and recorded and everything, right? Dookie comes out, Smash comes out, and you're like, oh, we have an album fixing to come out. It's already written. It just so happens to be legitimately punk rock. But like you said, now we have some money to advertise it. And so I do think that a punk rock band basically snuck in the back door of popular music and was like, oh, by the way, we're with these guys.
Yeah, when would this have been given a chance in almost any other time period, right?
Not even a chance. Listen to how fast these songs are, dude. These songs are fast, dude. That's the one thing that I couldn't stop thinking about was when I was listening to it, how fast the songs are.
Well, and so that's the talent in some of Tim's vocal delivery is he squeezes like these full sentences into Matt Freeman and Matt Freeman at the same time. We don't need a water, let the motherfucker, and he's just going and going and going, and it's really like it's an impressive performance if nothing else. Yeah.
I watched a lot of videos making that Tim Armstrong thing, and I saw him and Lars interacting as young men, and it's so clear how well they connected, and then how I don't think that Matt Freeman gets enough credit, because without Matt Freeman getting Tim and picking him up and going, hey man, clean yourself up, bro, you got to get your shit together, we wouldn't have Rancid. Like, we just wouldn't.
He's the heart of the band. He's like the heart and soul and the best musician. Like he's not the star. Those two guys are the stars.
I got a gnarly sunburn.
Yeah. But Matt is the most essential, I think. Like Matt is the that's the thing that makes him so much different than every other band. We
I will say this
a couple weeks ago. Like, it's just he's a luxury that just no other band has a Matt Freeman just at their disposal.
People say that Matt's the one part of the band you couldn't replace, and in my opinion, there is no part of this band you could replace.
Agreed.
They are either a together band or they are a not together band.
Yeah, I saw.
Because look, you got Tim Armstrong side projects, not as good as Rancid. Large and stuff, not as good as Rancid. Charger and Devil's Brigade, good bands. These are all good bands. They're not as good as Rancid. So when you take these parts and you split them up, you just simply don't have the same magic.
No, and I remember that was years ago. It was like a Facebook post that someone did, and they did it with like a bunch of bands. It wasn't just Rancid, and a lot of people were like voting for Lars on that one as the most replaceable. Like, they already had a great album with that. But like,
what?
No,
I'm sorry, but Self-Titled 93 is not even close to their best album.
So I've actually thought about that, and I think it dovetails into the Let's Go conversation. I have a real funny relationship with that album where I like it a lot, but I never like. I just don't consider it a lot. And I think of it as more proto-Rancid because Lars isn't there. Like, I know it's a Rancid album. It is a Rancid album. Undoubtedly, it's got good songs. Lars is there very shortly after, so it's not like super disconnected from him. But to me, like, my Rancid is those three guys doing that thing. And I just give their stuff a little more like weight, the stuff that he was in. And I look at that other stuff as more like preseason Rancid or something. You know, I don't really know.
I do and I don't agree with that, like, simultaneously, because I definitely understand like where you're coming from. I just don't think the album's that good. Like, it's in perspective, like within their catalog, you put it up against almost any other band, and it's the same thing with the 2000 record. It's better than most band entire catalog or their best album. I think that they were just getting started though. Like, that's just not their best music. And there's these like hipster guys that are like, oh, 93 is their best album by far. I'm like, dude, just objectively
and
wrong,
that's why I had to mention it, because I know a lot of people who are hardcore Rancid fans have such a sentimental attachment to that album that they feel
weird,
like
isn't it?
A little bit different. I do think that album, Let's Go, and at least the most and Tomorrow Never Comes are part of one sort of side of Rancid. And then I think Op Ivy, you could put that in there. Wolves, Indestructible, and Dominoes are another one of the two main tranches. And then I think Self-Titled and Life Won't Wait are just their own extremes of the kind of those two sounds of like there's the driving punky stuff that I think Let's Go, Self-Titled, and the newer album gets, and then there's the ska and the pop and the more eclectic stuff that Wolves, Dominoes, and Indestructible brings in. And the other two albums I think are just extreme examples of those two versions. I do think Life Won't Wait.
I think Honor and Troublemaker both fall into the same category as Indestructible.
I was gonna have you tag in just because you know those albums a little bit better.
They sound
without analyzing those. Yeah,
there's so much that they fall into that. Yes, they are very much that, because they sound, dude. You can make a mixtape of all 4 albums: Indestructible, Dominoes, Honor's All We Know, Troublemaker, and if you could fool with the equalizer a little bit, maybe mess with the mix a little bit, you can make it sound like a coherent record.
Yeah.
Cohesive record.
And that is, and when we do the comparison thing, that is the style I probably most prefer from Rancid, more so than this style that they have on these albums. But it's not like this is a bad one, or not like it's a bad choice. It's just what I think made Rancid super, super special was kind of that stuff. And I think they talked about,
I like catchy music. That's just what I like.
Yeah. That's and Rancid does it really well while still keeping a hard edge, like kind of no one else really ever did. I know Grimple was a band like in this early form,
bro,
that they were really like into that they cited at the time as one of the things, and because they were, and I've checked out a few sources, they were a little self-conscious about not doing Op IV2, which kind of seems like why they waited a little bit till Wolves to kind of like bring that sort of force back. They were trying to blaze their own trail.
Guys, what are y'all doing, man? You should have done Op IV2. What are you talking about? Quit being assholes and share the beautiful music that you got in your brain with us, man. I would love to have just gotten Op IV2. What are we talking about? I think people would have. Well, I don't know. There would have been. I think it would have been far more split down the middle than it is now.
And who again? Who
Grimple's awesome, by the way. I love that band.
What if though the ska punk thing isn't like that? People don't have that on the radar because it's not the late 90s quite yet. And so as you're saying, Green Day and Offspring are getting signed, and then if they have a ska album, what if that just gets like left behind? You know what I mean?
That's true.
I mean, it's a funny counterfactual, but what if it's because it's the punk album?
I want to point out that they have an overwhelmingly large amount of anthemic, catchy songs on this record. They're just played at a tempo that is just far faster than anything that they did on later records. There isn't anything that they did since this record that's this fast that I can recall, except maybe 2000. But even then, it's not even as fast. It's just chaotic.
But 2000 is more explicitly hardcore though, so it doesn't seem as extreme. Kind of, do you know what I mean? Where
maybe.
This is taking music that doesn't have to be this fast and like kind of extending that to right. I think like on 2000 the guitars are tuned to like what a hardcore would sound like. I think it's just it has more of a vibe
another thing.
Yeah.
That I want to bring up is that the guitar sound on this album is different than it is on any other record that they make.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I think that they were really just getting to know each other. I think that Billy Joe Armstrong has something to do with it. It has much more of a Green Day tone of like guitar tone. Mm-hmm. It might be produced a little different. The mix might be a little different. It might have the highs turned up a little bit more, but it sounds like that kind of sound to me.
And then on the mix,
early Green Day, like early, a lot
of the rock and roll kind of styling. So on that mix too, that's part of Brett talked about that in the Smash book that Brett Gurwitz, I should say,
right.
So they were all in. They made this album. They really liked it, and then it was almost pressed, and then Brett realized that it only sounded good in his car. So he realized he mixed it to his ear, and you know about this making albums. You gotta, that album's gotta sound good everywhere, and that's sort of how you settle on the mix. Well, he didn't realize like he was kind of too. Again, he's literally blowing up with the Offspring at the same time this is happening. Dude might have been a little distracted as he was doing this, but he said it was good. It was right before they sent it to press. They went back in for like an emergency mixing session, and got it to the sound that it's in. So even it was done pretty hastily, but I wonder what that original mix sounded like. But you think of that sort of the precarity. And now I don't know to believe Brett. All of these stories are now starting to start with him in his car, because we told the Offspring story when he would come in and play and he couldn't park his car. So I don't know if Brett's just driving all the time. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but that's what these stories of our original. But I kind of believe him because it is mixed very consistently. It has a very consistent tone of something that might have been kind of mass produced in that way. The catchy songs though, as you're saying, even they are super fast. Like think of like Sidekick and Tenderloin and As One. Those songs are just barn burner, which is the point where Tim's voice sounds like someone who's been talking too much almost at the end of him, where he's almost
Right.
out of the thing. He's also a better singer a little bit later in how to like control his voice and
Oh,
make that
way
sound
better.
just a little more natural. That was just
He's a punk
learn how
rock
to
kid
do
in
it.
this album still. He's not a full grown, mature adult yet. I mean, I don't know what his age was, but he wasn't
Yeah,
there
he'd be
yet.
early 20s at that if they're kind of like late teenagers in Op Ivy. You know what I mean?
So they have this, like, you know how the Opera Ivy guitar sound has like this reverby, tinny sound to it?
yeah.
That sound is like not replicated, but there's like a tip of the cap to that sound in this guitar.
Yeah, it's just used in a different way because it's more of a driving.
Right. And then they have very mature lyrics in this album for somebody that age. Like, but yes, I hate, okay. Does it drive you that they say vigilant sidekick and not vigilante?
It hates me that it took me years to know what the lyrics to any of that of Sidekick were, because that would people used to like. So it's one of those things where like no one I knew really listened to punk, but you'd be in my car and you'd have to hear the punk songs and people would make up like their own funny versions. And Sidekick was another because people liked X-Men, right? So I'd be like, hey, here's the song about Wolverine, and they're like, I have no idea what it's saying.
I mean, I had a dream I was a vigilant sidekick. It's vigilante sidekick, not vigilant. It drives me nuts when
is it vigilant though in the
it's
lyrics?
vigilante.
Oh, yeah, I always thought it was vigilante. Did you think it was vigilant? Because he's a vigilante's sidekick. He's Wolverine's sidekick, right?
I don't know, bro. It doesn't make sense to me though the way they sing it.
Because Wolverine's the vigilante and he's a vigilante's sidekick. His name is Tim. He's a lesser known character.
Yeah, but they don't say vigilantes. They say vigilant.
Well, Tim's never been accused of pronouncing things. Okay.
Well, no. I'm just saying it drives me nuts because when I was young, I didn't understand what they were saying because I didn't realize what they were trying to say.
I got what you're saying.
Wrong. I was like, what is he saying there? And when I figured it out, I was like, oh my goodness, you're saying the wrong word. It's just like when people say guillotine. It's not guillotine. It is guillotine. The word is not. It makes me so angry. Whenever MMA guys do it on national television, he's got him in a guillotine.
In the guillotine choke.
It's a guillotine. The word is it is fucking guillotine. It makes me so mad, bro.
Yep, the two L's make it go. Yeah, I'm making my English teacher heart happy, but yes.
Glad that I recognize that though. It makes me so angry, dude.
No, but I think I was making the comment about Tim. I've had that experience. I've had like these life-changing Rancid songs that I've gone back and like thank you lyrics.com for knowing I was following the wrong ideology on that whole perspective the whole time. Tim doesn't have as much of the affected voice though on this as he does like when he's tried to be faux Joe Strummer, he developed that like the Tim voice. He doesn't quite have it yet here. It's still that young guy Tim that's being interviewed by Matt Pinfield that's kind of like shy and stuff, you know.
One thing I wanted to bring up, I'm glad I didn't forget. You had mentioned that the first album, since it didn't have Lars in it, that it was like proto Rancid. Have you gone back and watched any of their live shows from 93, 94?
About a year ago, I did a little bit on my channel.
Did you notice any of the stuff, like how much better the song sounded when they had Lars doing backup on the like 93 songs?
No, I didn't take note of that, but
I just happened to catch it. I was like watching a video. And I was like, I wasn't looking at it. I was listening to it while I was doing something. And I was like, what was that? I rewound it, went back. I was like, that sounded weird. And it's because it was Lars singing songs that Tim sang. And Lars was singing. He was going back and forth with Tim. I wish I could remember what song it was. But it was the song off of 93. And I was like, wow, if they could re-record that record together, it would be... Like, that would be a thing that I would love for them to do is go back and re-record 93.
That'd be kind of fun. Just kind of do it basically the same songs, but with some of their sensibilities, technologies, and stuff they have now. That'd be cool.
What Brandon Steckenart could do to that album?
Oh, yeah.
Like, what? It would be a whole different album. It would just be crazy. I think it would be so much. And in the new production, like, it would just sound like a whole new album. I think it would be amazing to have that. I would love for that to happen. I mean, I don't think they have the time and desire to do that, but that would be a pretty cool project. If I had the money to pay them to do it, I would.
Yeah, he is Lars is in the Adina video, isn't he? Isn't he performing with the band in that video? I want to say.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny. He comes in pretty quick after the first album. Like it's not a whole lot of time, but he's still not that big of a contributor on Let's Go from like a song.
I think they had most of Let's Go already written.
Probably.
And he was like, "Yeah, that's good."
And it's mostly Tim's like personal album about the experience. They're a pretty like famous trio of Brett, Lars, and Brett Gerwitz, Lars and Tim in the studio. And he said they fit together real well. Lars told the story once and it was when Brett was still in his band, that they became such a tight band that they would make the same, like not make the same mistakes, but like one person would make a mistake and they would just change the song when they were playing live because they were so into, like almost like an old school rock band or something like that, where, you know, maybe Brett played the wrong note or something like that, and they would just follow the song where it went, and they didn't have to talk to each. They were just such a band. And I think the Op
That's
Ivy
awesome.
album, this album, even the self-titled of it captures a band very, very much. And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about, of how it sounds like monotone and it's rough. It also sounds alive. It does not sound static at all. For the monotone, I agree. And that's a comment that a lot of people have made about, maybe a criticism of Rancid's music. They very much capture like a punk rock room, though, in this, for as clean as it is recorded, all things considered. I mean, they would go on to much cleaner things in the next album, but they really captured like a band. Like it looks like, I don't think that
It does
live
sound
thing
like
might
you're at
not
a
have been
show.
that much different. Yeah, it does sound like music that is meant to be heard in a club. I think even more so than their later stuff, which is produced a little sweeter. This stuff sounds like it comes from a club.
I think I'm going to put some time in on this record in the next couple of weeks and just listen to it a few more times. I just want to get refamiliarized with it. I spent a lot of time with it as a kid. I listened to this album as much as I did Outcome the Wolves because it was side A, side B on a 90-minute tape for me.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, and I had it again. It's funny, I piece these things back together. I always say, like, I listened to Rancid more at home, and No Effects and Bad Religion were a little bit more like driving. For whatever reason, Let's Go was in the driving mix, and that's why I remember specifically skipping around a lot of the songs. It's a pretty good driving record too, because it's kind of upbeat. It's got that kind of thing.
Going like 97 miles an hour the other day, listening to this record. I was like, I gotta slow down.
With the loaded fire
in a hand. Yeah, dude. Like every song on there, I was like, okay, well, what do I not like about this record? And I think I was just burnt out on it. Is really what it is. I think I was just burnt out on it, and they had new stuff that I was a little more interested in at the time. Because once you go below the surface of this record and you really start digging into each song, there's not a lot of fat to trim. You could have made it an EP and an album, but like the EP would be argued as just as good as the album, and then you'd be like, well, why did they just make a longer album?
Yeah.
It's a catch-22 with this record.
And again, our criticism is literally our criticism. I think it's a very kind of almost personal criticisms that we have of the album, which is, I mean, it's important and helps the perspective on the album. But like, we're putting out like this whole thing has been the biggest disclaimer on saying, despite everything we have said, it's 100% certified classic. Like
I think that's how I feel about it. Despite everything we've ever said about it and everything that I've ever said about where it places in their discography's like rankings, this album is almost perfect. It's like a 9.85 out of 10 for me. I think I would like to have one or two songs gone, but only one of them is a song I don't really like.
We need to hang out in like the summer of '94 because because like we're like 3 weeks away from Linoleum, from Punk and Drublic coming out, and like Pennywise is about to have their album come out, and then Bad Religion is about to hit Stranger Than Fiction. Like, geez.
Okay, so what do we have? What comes out next? What album drops next?
Punk and Drublic is the next one on my radar. That's in July. I know that. So it's fairly soon.
Let me see what I've got written down. I might have something we might have to go straight into Punk and Drublic because I think the fans would like that. We haven't done a lot of No Effects content. It feels like we do, but if you go look at what we did, it's really not. Yeah,
they're more of a guide because they're you and I talk about a lot of No Effects like off air and stuff. They're just kind of a guiding band, but we've only had like the one episode where we did the song. We've done the song as an album. We haven't done like a deep single album.
Yeah, and I haven't, and I don't really care for that album, to be honest. So. I'm gonna let you take the lead on that one for sure because
shucks.
I know, right? I don't like dislike it at all.
Yeah,
but I don't love it
when we did the rankings. You were that was the thing that sort of violated your expectation of like, oh, I thought it would be higher and it wasn't.
I did think I 100% thought it was going to be higher than that. I was a little like taken aback, to be honest with you. Let's see. You want to do No Effects next week, and then there's some stuff coming. There's some good stuff coming up, dude. We got Lars Fredriksson's Viking album. I think that's a really good record.
That'd be a good one for us. That'd be a good one to break down the individual songs, because they're so unique in the stories and all that.
What album do you think pairs good with No Effects, Punk and Drublic that we could talk about next week? Is there a particular record? We don't have to go like. Every episode doesn't have to be like a celebration of a thing. We can talk about No Effects, Punk and Drublic, and
So something else that's like in a different time period that's kind of a similar.
Sure, different time period or similar, man. Why don't we? You know what? Let's do No Effects, Punk and Drublick, and let's do Grimple Up Your Ass.
Okay.
Because that's an album that I don't think you're familiar with as much as I am, but I haven't gone back and listened to it in its entirety a lot, and I think I want to.
Right.
So
that'd be fun because I think I would do more studying of that than I actually would because the No Effects will be like kind of like the conversation we had just now of something that I have a great deal of familiarity with, and we'll talk back and forth. But yeah, that's a good combo, and it'll sort of be we kind of teased a little bit of what they sound like on this episode. So
right, and Grimple's that album in particular is like their more accessible record too. So if I've been told a lot in the comments recently that people are getting a lot of recommendations from this channel, and I just want to say that is probably the coolest thing I can hear from anybody.
Yeah.
Is that I'm introducing people to music that they are now like falling in love with, and I think that's amazing, man. I was having a talk with this dude George. Shout out to George, man, Boswell. He's on my Patreon and part of the Discord. Dude's awesome. He supports the channel like a motherfucker. We were talking about compilation tapes and compilation CDs, and I was telling him how I don't think they're necessary anymore, because he was like, man, you should put out a comp. And I was like, yeah, it's a lot of work to put out a comp. And he's like, yeah, but we wouldn't have what we have if it wasn't for comps. And I'm like, yeah, but we only needed comps because the internet didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, man, where was I going with that? I had a point that I was trying to make.
Recommendations. So.
Anyways, the point is that that's basically what this is that I do comps every Sunday on my live stream, and I bring up music, and I just think it's cool, man. I think it's cool, and I do think that I have a love for compilations. I mean, Give 'Em the Boot is like something we talk about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And George was a little more into the more underground comps and stuff like that. And I think he likes all the Give 'Em the Boot, Fat Music, the Hopelessly Devoted to You stuff. I'm sure he likes all that stuff too. But I know he really, really fucks with the heavy underground stuff. And I don't know, it's just a good conversation. I appreciate talking with these people that I met on this channel. It's amazing. I mean, I'm actually like becoming friends with George, and like I met him through this channel. So it's really, really cool. He lives in Austin, or like halfway between me here and Austin. So like I'm sure at some point in the near future I will meet him and like get to hang out with him and stuff. So
shout out to comps, because I've been to I heard a lot of heavier music, like you were saying that, like a lot of the street punk that I learned about first that I didn't realize that I liked. I heard of all that through comps. So like the heavy music comps as well. Like we talk about those mainline ones, but again, like those comps that were coming out of New York, where I discovered like the Casualties, and the Virus, and the was it Devochikas or whatever, all those bands, all those Mohawk.
Devochkas, is that how you say
it? Yeah,
you
know what I'm talking about. Yeah, all those like studded belt Mohawk bands that I really didn't have a lot of access to, all came through those.
See,
those
that's my favorite stuff. Like where me and you overlap. I think you're a little heavier on the pop punk side, and I'm a little heavier on the Mohawk studded belt side.
Yeah.
And I mean little, not a ton. I like pop punk a lot, dude. Like, I think my favorite subgenre probably is pop punk, but I love street punk music, man. Like, I'm doing that. The Havoc tape is almost done. Like, I'm check this out. I absolutely cannot believe that I have this now. Like, it's fucking crazy to me. Come on, thing.
There we go. Our rebellion continues.
Dude, it's so crazy that this is on my label.
Nice.
Like, it's just so freaking crazy, because I listened to this band 20 years ago.
That's wild.
And it's really cool that I'm working with them. Shout out to Justin from the Havoc. I'm actually going to be putting up a podcast that I did with the guitar tech from the Misfits in Danzig.
Oh, wow. Talk about a guy who got some stories.
Bro, my channel is getting so strange that I fucking love it, man. I love everybody that watches it. I like arguing in the comments. It don't bother me, man. I don't get offended by it. I love talking with people. I mean, I might sound like I'm offended, but I'm not.
I you know what though? But I wish like you could replicate yourself just for this one interview. And I need a troll to like. You need to get a good interview out of this guy, but I need some troll to ask a bunch of inappropriate like Glenn and Jerry questions.
I straight up asked him if Glenn was a dickhead.
Yeah. I don't think we need an answer to that question, because I think that's probably been answered.
Yeah, I think it's funny though, because he was like, "No, man, he's really nice," and I was like, "I think Danny from Northside Kings would argue that, but okay." Do you know what I'm referring to? So, okay, like 15 years ago, I was friends with some bands, and one of them was a band called Northside Kings. I don't remember where they're from. I wasn't like really good friends with them. I just knew them from playing Texas a lot, and they played with Death Before Dishonor, all these dudes from like Boston, Philly, New York. And so my friend comes running up to me one day. He's like, "Bro, you got to see this video. Danny from Northside Kings just knocked out Danzig." And I was like, "Why was he hanging out with Danzig?" And they're like, "Dude, Northside Kings was supposed to open up for him." And okay, this is what the legend of it is. I don't know how accurate all this is, but I did see a video, and I do know that he got socked in the face and knocked down.
Oh,
So,
look at there's a lot on there. Like the Rock and Roll True Stories dude did a whole like 6 minute
really?
thing on
Okay,
it. Yeah.
so to my understanding, oh man, that's crazy. I didn't know all that. I know that guy, so it's just weird to me.
Oh wait, he's got an article on Vice too from 2012. I punched Danzig in the face is the headline, and knocked him the fuck out is the subhead.
So I knew him. I don't know him any longer. All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, like I remember that happening. Man, I saw it on like a very grainy video on early YouTube.
Yeah.
And my buddy was like, "Dude, that's fucking Danny." I was like, "What?" So apparently they were supposed to play, and then Danzig like bumped him from the show, and he's like, "Yo, we need to get paid though." And Danzig's like, "No, you didn't play, you don't get paid." And then they started arguing, and Danzig like shoves him, and Danny just boom, and Danzig just drops out of there.
I'm reading some of the transcript according to this is good. We need to like every like 3 years, someone on YouTube just needs to revive that as a poor Glenn.
I mean, sure. Poor Glenn. Hey, did you see that I made, speaking about compilations, dude, they kind of came up through this. Did you see that I started making these?
No, look at that. Shoot.
Bro, I've already got 2 of them. It's not my music. It's like, dude, Rancid, Pistol Grip, Angry Samoans. It's just like every month I do one live stream where I make an actual mixtape. I only make a handful of them. I'm not really trying to make any money off it, obviously. That's crazy. But I'm just trying to like, I make them, I keep one, I give one away, and then I sell 3 to cover the cost because the tapes are getting expensive to find them and buy them. But yeah, wow, that was fun.
Yeah,
dude. Next week's gonna be a big episode, dude. No effects because it's gonna get a big crowd, I think.
Yeah.
And especially that album.
A lot to say on both the album and a little bit on the album, but also I think it'll be a good chance to sort of revisit their stance and them not signing. We didn't really talk about Rancid and their hunt this time. We'll probably talk about that a little more when we talk about Outcome the Wolves in a couple of months. But really, this would be a good time to talk about NoFX and their flirtation with the major labels after this album and how all that went.
See, I think you're going to know more about that than I do. NoFX is always a band that I liked, not loved. Mm-hmm. I got more into NoFX the later they were out because all my favorite NoFX stuff is like Pump Up the Volume and Later.
Yeah, your 2000 on is really your zone. Yeah.
So I like some of their earlier stuff, but like I never was like super into them until like their more fast, cleaner, melodic stuff. And I was like, dude, this band got really freaking good all of a sudden. Like they were always good, but they got like really good. It's a very unpopular opinion. Although my favorite album by them is Ribbed. So, it's just because do what?
That's like we're so consistent tonight. Bro,
I don't know what I'm talking about. I never have an idea what I'm talking about. I'm the worst YouTuber. Let's just put it that way. I suck.
Yeah, I looked it up in the dictionary. Actually, I did chat GPT. I said, "Who's the worst YouTuber?" And your channel came up. It was crazy.
Yeah, dude, that shit wouldn't even surprise me.
Yeah, had your name, your address, all your bad takes. They were all just listed there.
Oh, don't do that. Don't put the bad takes in there. I don't want to get murdered. I have a lot of bad takes. Dude, some guy was telling me, he's like, bro, somebody told me that I have a lot of bad takes. And I was like, yeah, I said, but you got to understand, part of it is that I crank it to 11. Like if I say I hate something, it's almost certainly not the case, but I have to say that, dude. Like I'm running a channel. Like I have to get interactions. I have to get people's emotions running up and high, up and down, up and down. I have to gaslight people to a certain degree. I have to do clickbaity stuff to a certain degree. But if you listen to me for 10 minutes and you get to know me just a little bit, I'm a pretty sensitive, I'm pretty genuine, and I'm pretty knowledgeable to a certain degree. Like I didn't even say you're more knowledgeable than I am, but I got a fair bit of knowledge, but I'm a hardworking dude and I don't make shit up. So like, I have no problem being wrong. I have no problem being like, oh, I got to amend this. I said this wrong. Like that's not a problem with me. A lot of people can't handle that shit. So yeah, dude, the hot takes come with like the acceptance of like, oh man, I just don't take myself that serious, man. Like that's
It's
what it
also
is. I don't take myself that serious, bro.
and if you haven't been burned on some hot takes, you've never said anything. Is what I was, you know what I mean?
Facts. Right. Right.
There's some and the art of the hot take is to the extent there's an art to it is sort of that gut thing, and that's and our whole podcast is a mix of the gut thing with research and knowledge. We sort of we're blending those things together.
That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. I'm gonna make you a couple of Punk Rock Review shirts, Rob. I got two designs, and I'll send them to you. It's large, right?
Yeah.
All right. Cool, man. Thanks everybody for hanging out. So. Well, let me know if you do, man. I'll make you some more shirts. But thank you everybody for hanging out. I love doing this. I'm so happy. I can't wait till we hit 10K. It's coming. We're already almost to 6. It's gonna happen. We're gonna hit 10,000 very soon. And very soon, not like next month or anything, but next 12. I can't imagine we wouldn't hit 10. So, stick with us, man. And if you want to advertise your music through the channel, go ahead and let me know. I have rates already in my head of what I'm going to charge people because it's not crazy amounts of money, but I have like certain like tiers for what kind of videos I put it on. But I want to help people's music get out there. I'd rather you sponsor the video for, let's say, $30 to $50 than get 500 from some company to say a bunch of shit I don't care about. I would much rather help a band. So, and those numbers are very accurate to what I'm thinking. So, like, if you think it's worth your $50 to like get on a podcast, and the way I would do it is like if we'll agree on amount of views. So, like, let's say you say I want to give you $50, but I need to make sure we get at least 1,000 views. Okay, if I put it on a video and the video only gets 700 views, I'll put it on another one too. That way you get what you're paying for. Like I'm not doing it for any kind of monetary gain necessarily. It's to help the channel stay like productive and alive while helping a band get something that they need desperately. And I feel like this community can work together in ways that a lot of people just don't think about, don't voice. So if you need my help at all, let me know. If you're on drugs and you're dealing with depression and chemical imbalances and just having a bad day, my information is in the description. You can always reach out. I have never ignored anybody, and I'm not going to start now. So that was a mouthful. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I love y'all. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep it sleazy. See you all next week. Peace.